You checked the badge at the door, but did you check the suitcase they were carrying? That exact dynamic, the massive gap between verifying an identity and verifying what that identity is actually doing inside, is driving the most critical security failures we're seeing across the industry right now. Look, we have successfully hardened authentication at the front door. We know exactly how to check the badge. But as a series of recent incidents have completely proven, we remain entirely blind to the integrity of the payloads being carried inside. When we look at this structural gap, we really have to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. Proving who is calling, that's largely a solved problem. We've got enterprise identity, mature authentication, OAuth tokens, the whole shebang. But proving what they're actually doing at the exact moment of execution, that action integrity, is totally unsolved. And the core issue we're dissecting today is that a perfectly legitimate, authorized credential is no longer a guarantee of a safe outcome. If your infrastructure is only looking at the ID and just assuming the work being requested is safe, you're playing defense on the wrong field. To understand just how urgent this is, let's look at the threat intel timeline from this past July 2026. This isn't just some theoretical risk. This is an abstract vulnerability turning into a concrete, hair-on-fire crisis in a matter of weeks. On July 8th, the GhostApproval vulnerability dropped, affecting major AI assistants. Literally 6 days later, on July 14th, the massive AsyncAPI supply chain hack was uncovered. And all of this is leading right up to the finalization of the Model Context Protocol specification on July 28th. Let's break down exactly how this who versus what gap enabled these events. Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1, the AsyncAPI compromise and the trusted pipeline. The AsyncAPI NPM organization compromise is literally a textbook example of this blind spot. Our expectation? A completely trusted release pipeline safely delivering code. The reality? Over the course of just 90 minutes, 5 completely Trojanized package versions were published. We expected a verified CI/CD trigger, but instead, we got poisoned NPM packages. And honestly, the most terrifying part? These malicious packages shipped with perfectly valid provenance signing. The system essentially stamped a verified gold star seal of approval directly onto malware. So here's the absolute crucial point you need to take away. 0 stolen tokens, 0 compromised maintainer accounts. The attacker didn't steal a credential because they didn't need to. Instead, a simple GitHub Actions workflow misconfiguration let an attacker push a malicious commit to an unprotected pre-release branch. The project's own legitimate, fully credentialed release pipeline picked it up, built it, and published it. The attacker simply handed a forged payload to a perfectly legitimate pipeline. The pipeline's identity was 100% verified, but the integrity of the payload it was carrying never checked. Part 2, Ghost Approval and the Lying UI. This issue isn't confined to CI/CD pipelines either. It applies directly to human approvals and AI coding assistants too. Let's walk through the mechanics of the Ghost Approval exploit, which impacted 6 major assistants, including tools like Cursor and Claude Code. Step 1. A malicious symlink is planted in a repository, cleverly disguised as an ordinary file, like a standard project settings JSON. Step 2, the developer asks the agent to set up the workspace, and the agent prompts the UI for permission to edit what totally looks like that harmless file. Step 3, the human developer looks at the prompt and approves it in good faith. But step 4 is where the deception actually hits. The agent resolves the symlink and overwrites a highly sensitive target, like an SSH key file. This quote right here perfectly hammers home that who versus what gap. The authorization was real. What it actually authorized at the moment of execution was not what the human believed it was authorizing. Think about that. The human gave the right approval badge. They validated the identity of the action, but the agent went ahead and executed a deadly suitcase. The payload was fundamentally misrepresented to the user. Which brings us to part 3, MCP limits, and why identity just isn't enough. Let's look at our newest industry standards. The upcoming July 28th Model Context Protocol, or MCP release candidate, actually does brilliant work in hardening that front door. It mandates OAuth 2.1, implements PKC, and requires strict issuer validation. It significantly reduces the odds of an unauthorized caller getting through. Make no mistake, those client identity checks are rigorous and absolutely necessary. But we really need to listen to this independent analysis from Maxim Zavocek over at Akamai regarding the new MCP spec. He says critical security boundaries are now entirely dependent on how developers implement them. Why is that? Because MCP secures who is calling. It completely proves identity, but it leaves the integrity of the actual requested action, the payload itself, entirely up to the server to figure out on its own. And this brilliantly illustrates our lingering vulnerability. You have this incredibly hardened front door that easily passes OAuth 2.1 checks. But because the payload is unverified by the protocol itself, you throw the door wide open to things like header/body desync attacks. An attacker can literally send an MTP-specific HTTP header that completely disagrees with the value hiding in the request body. The request passes the check because the caller's badge is real, but the mismatched malicious contents of their suitcase just slip right by. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we actually go about verifying that action integrity. So if proving identity isn't enough, we absolutely must move to verifying the action integrity itself. DevFortress explicitly moves beyond those simple identity checks to address this exact tactical layer. The whole mission here is to verify the integrity of the action itself, ensuring that every single request actually matches its authorized intent. It does this through public outcomes like payload signing, which makes any tampering between authorization and execution immediately detectable. It also uses multi-identity attestation, firmly tying a specific payload directly to the specific caller identity that generated it. So if an agent suddenly tries to edit an SSH key when it was only approved for a basic config file, that mismatch is caught immediately. And when that mismatch is caught, this is the only number that matters. 2. Sub-2-second automated containment. The exact moment a malicious payload is presented or any behavioral deviation is detected, DevFortress steps in. It suspends tool access and quarantines the agent in under 2 seconds. There's no waiting for a human analyst to spot the anomaly in a log file somewhere. The threat is contained instantly, and the entire session is preserved safely for forensic review. The landscape has fundamentally changed, folks, and authorized credentials simply isn't a guarantee of a safe outcome anymore. Don't just trust the badge. You have to verify the action. I highly recommend grabbing the DevFortress Master Edition textbook over at devfortress.net. It'll show you exactly how you can practically secure the integrity of every single session in your environment. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Take a hard look at your own infrastructure today. If your pipeline was handed a perfectly valid credential, but it was secretly carrying a completely forged payload right now, would your systems actually know the difference?